Here is a story that, while it is clearly unfinished, because the last sentence has no period after it, that is, I think that last sentence was going to be continued. It works as a last sentence. In any case, I suspect I wrote this in the late 80s or early 90s, when I was about 30. Tragedy. Duffy sat in the wooden chair beside the rickety coffee table and tried to light his cigarette. The cheap lamp on the coffee table gave little light, and Duffy couldn't quite tell if the match was striking the proper side of the matchbook. The 1 o'clock showing of the 11 o'clock news was in progress, the volume painfully low. She couldn't hear. But Duffy had to read the lips at this low volume, and he couldn't watch the screen while trying to get the match lit. He paused, thinking she stirred. He wondered if she would be able to hear the match being struck. He resumed and managed to get the match going. He lit his cigarette. He chuckled at the notion of exploding after inhaling. "Lot of whiskey," he muttered. He was grateful for one thing. He'd ridden a bicycle this time. There's not a hell of a lot of damage you can do with a bicycle, Duffy thought. To reassure himself, he thought back over his ride home. He'd left the barmaid a decent enough tip. Thank God, he thought, because he'd had to count several times to satisfy himself that it was 15%. 75 per $5, right. And out of $16.50 worth of drinks, $3.50 was fine. It was good, and he'd left with a wave. She smiled back. It was a safe night. No off-color remarks had he made. Nothing untoward had passed his lips. Nothing which could be taken the wrong way had escaped from him. He'd even left the bar without putting a song on the jukebox just before he left. He needed no fanfare tonight. He'd gone out the door and walked straight up to the signpost where his bicycle was tied. He'd seen one car along the way. It crossed the intersection near the bar. He was many feet away from it. All in all, it was a successful night. Duffy had almost leapt off the bicycle when he got into his driveway, but that enthusiastic move hurt no one, and dropping it by the hedges outside was sloppy, but not totally out of order. She might have heard him lifting the lid in the bathroom. It had caused a loud sound. The lid of the garbage can in the kitchen might also have awakened her. He'd thrown it back to toss in orange peels. The process of taking the orange out of the refrigerator was done with true stealth, although stealth wasn't needed, there being nothing wrong with it. It was just he had to be quiet. The cold from the open refrigerator could possibly have crept into the bedroom. Duffy put out his cigarette. He looked in the ashtray ruefully. "It's amazing how I worry," he said aloud, but very quietly. The weather report was being given. "Incomprehensible," said Duffy. The sports report came after some ads. "Incomprehensible," said Duffy. He summarized the two reports with a question in his tone. "It's too cold and the Jets won?" He belched. "Duffy," he heard. "She has arisen," said Duffy to himself. He sat still and listened. The scuffling of slippers against the kitchen floor met his ears. Out of the corner of his eye he saw her in the doorway. "You left the porch light on, Duffy," she said. "Oh, hello, Jane," Duffy said. "Did you know you left the porch light on?" Jane said. "Well," Duffy said, do the neighbors a favor and turn it off." "I already did turn it off, Duffy, just now." "Ah," answered Duffy. "It's not up to me to wake up and turn it off after you come home. But you've taken it upon yourself to do it tonight." "Thank you, dear," Duffy said. "Oh, go to hell," Jane said, and went back to the bedroom. After 5 minutes of sitting staring at the part of the TV just below the screen, Duffy whispered, "She's in rare form tonight." Some game show was on the screen now. Duffy got out of his chair and went back into the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator. He saw a jar of maraschino cherries. He half expected her to call from the bedroom, telling him to shut the door. He quickly took out the jar and closed the refrigerator. He remembered that maraschino cherries went well with vodka. Was there not a supply? He said. There was, he said, as he opened the cabinet door. There wasn't much left, but there was enough to fill a smallish glass. With some juice from the jar of maraschino cherries, and maybe 3 cherries, it would be a brimful of sweet-tasting evening splendor. The fluorescent light above the sink buzzed dutifully as Duffy quietly paused. It was the soft background to Jane's snoring. Duffy sang snatches of songs about twilight. He put 4 cherries in the glass and slurped from it before too much could drip into the sink. He sipped some more and walked carefully into the other room. Sitting down, he put the glass by the ashtray and lit another cigarette, this time with ease. He tried to ignore the game show. He could not fathom what they were trying to figure out. He found himself looking in the eyes of a woman contestant. He felt he understood her. She didn't seem at all confused. She was just trying to win money fair and square. The ludicrous surroundings of the game show did not deter her. If she lost, she lost. Fame wasn't it. She could use some cash, he could tell. He looked at the ashtray. His cigarette was almost burned out. He inhaled the last tolerable bit. It was distasteful. He lit another match, but it flared up too suddenly and burned his thumb. He tried to light the find match, but over and over it yielded nothing. He tried to light the final match, but over and over it yielded nothing. He went into the kitchen to look for more matches. He opened a drawer in the kitchen cupboard. The slippers made their scuffling sound. "What are you looking for?" Jane said. "Oh, hello, Jane." "I said, what are you looking for?" Duffy stood taller. "I wouldst have matches, madam," he said. "Why, do you want to burn the house down?" "No." "You know, with you coming in stinking drunk all the time—" "I am not stinking drunk. Let me smell your breath." Duffy laughed. "I want to see if you've been drinking," Jane said. "I will not submit to this." "You've submitted before." "Well, of course I've been drinking. This is a secret?" "Well, then, you can't have matches." "Oh, for Christ's sake." "Well, let me smell your breath." "Why do you want to smell my breath?" "To see how much you've been drinking." "Why should that matter in regard to whether I can have a cigarette?" "I only said you couldn't have a match if you've been drinking too much." "You are being evasive, woman." "There he goes with the woman thing again." There was a pause in which Duffy wondered if he should smile or frown. "You've obviously had way too much." "All right," shouted Duffy. He said more calmly, "You can smell my breath." He wanted a cigarette. She stood right in front of him. He exhaled. Jane backed away, waving a hand in front of her face. "All right," she said. "I'll light it for you." "Why," Duffy said, this is disturbingly deferential." "I'm monitoring you," said Jane. "Get a cigarette." Duffy went into the other room. He picked up the pack and put it in his shirt pocket. As he got into the kitchen, Jane produced a matchbook from the pocket of her nightgown. Her back was to him. Thinking she might not have seen him, Duffy quickly went back to the other room and took 3 gulps from his drink. He put it down and went back into the kitchen. He tottered. She turned to him and smiled.